Have you ever wondered what it's like to own your own business? Be your own boss? Welcome to Season 7 of Business Mentorship, Keepin It Real, where we meet with corporate leaders who have taken the leap to business owner and join us as part of the Share Your Stories Online series. Hello, I'm Trish Tonak, and today we're going to meet a small business owner, celebrate their great idea, and introduce you to the person behind the logo. We invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the show. Our guest joins us from Washington, District of Columbia. Stephenie Foster is a lawyer, author, speaker, and advocate for the rights of women and girls. She has served as a U.S. diplomat in the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues and at the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan. Stephenie has worked as the Chief of Staff in the U.S. Senate and in the nonprofit sector, and joins us as a sponsor for this year's Share Your Stories micro-marketing grants. Stephenie is going to share her story on entrepreneurship and give us a behind-the-scenes look into the life of a small business owner. I'd like to welcome and introduce everyone to Stephenie.
It's so great to be here, Trish. I am really excited to join you.
You know, I have to say, I've been waiting with bated breath, as they say, for our conversation because we have so many things in common and we could talk for hours and hours. So I'm going to have to try to really keep myself onto the notes that I made before our conversation. But I thought we'd start with, as a founding partner of Smash Strategies, provide us with an overview of this initiative, because everything that you do is all about amplifying the voices and trying to push the envelope forward for women and girls.
Sure. And it's a really great way to start the conversation because Smash Strategies, which I co-founded with my business partner, Susan Markham, who I've also written a lot of articles and a book with, was really born out of the idea that we needed to provide our expertise on gender equality, women's rights, and women's leadership to companies, to organizations, to individual philanthropists, so that they could be more effective in their work. And the reason I say that in that very specific way is that very often that kind of expertise gets provided via a nonprofit organization or some kind of charitable endeavor. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we decided that it was important to say, essentially, via our business, that there was an intrinsic value to this that people would pay for. Right. And we wanted to test that proposition. So we started Smash for that reason. We both had worked in the U.S. government. I was at the State Department. Susan was at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And we had known each other for many years. We worked on tons of projects together and realized that we had a lot in common and that working together, we were able to provide this expertise. We decided to start the company coming out of the end of the Obama administration, where we had both been political appointees. We spent about, I'd say, 9 months to a year really pulling together a business plan and, you know, all the things you do. I mean, you know what they are in terms of what we had to think about for our name and all the kind of potential clients that we would reach out to and try to work with. I will say this sort of interesting. We made the assumption at the time that Hillary Clinton would be the president of the United States. We were wrong. But we also had decided that no matter what happened, we were going to start this business. And so we did. It was a different environment than we expected, but we were able to really take our skills and go from there. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot about being flexible, about changing a little bit of your perspective. But really, essentially, again, we started this business with the idea that this sort of expertise was useful to people would help them be more effective in their businesses, in their organizations, in their philanthropic ventures. And so we took it from there.
You know what I love about it, Stephenie, is it's really apolitical. It's not about your affiliation with a political party, although we all lean towards one or the other. But it's about the mandate of the global visibility of uplifting the opportunities for women and girls. Because I'm sure, like me, you have had conversations with people all over the world. And regardless of where we live, our gender gives us some similarities in terms of what happens corporately and what happens socially, right?
Absolutely. And some of the most interesting conversations I've had over the years, many years, both before I did this Smash Strategies and then, prior, whether I was at the State Department or working abroad, working with women's organizations and women individual leaders, is that when you got to a meeting or a conference or some kind of gathering, and there were women from very disparate parts of the world, countries with different economic kind of places on the economic kind of, ladder, different social structures. And there was always this sense at the beginning that we don't really have a lot in common.
Right.
You have this life, especially from people looking at people like someone like me or you coming from a developed country saying, we don't share the same issues. And by about, I can honestly say sometimes 30 minutes in, people realize, oh my gosh, these challenges we face and the potential solutions are different, but yet very similar. And
Absolutely.
There's so much we can learn from each other about things that have worked in one place that might work in another, approaches that might work, particular solutions. And I do think this is a broader question than just one sort of political leaning on the spectrum. I talk to people all the time who I know that I probably don't agree with on some very fundamental issues, but I do agree with them on the importance of women's leadership in whatever sector or organization or political party or business, because I think we're all better off when there are diverse perspectives in terms of our decision making.
That is so true. And that's what I really love about the work that you're doing, is that you're really raising the bar and shining a light on some of the global issues that we all share and providing solutions that will help to change that dynamic. And I know that, for you and I, who are probably in a very similar age cohort, we're really trying to make the differences for the people who are coming behind us, right? Because
Sure.
that's really where the change is going to happen. We've had our unique challenges and had to come up with solutions in breaking barriers to success. But what we're really trying to do as women in business is we're trying to pave the way for the people coming behind us. Right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think for me, I have found that to be a really kind of rewarding, but also challenging part of my sort of professional life.
Yep.
Because I don't want to make assumptions about what younger people are facing. I don't want to assume that I understand the sort of the world that they face. And I say that because I've noticed throughout, I'd say the last, 10 years, as I talk to people who are younger than I am, they are facing a very different world and set of social circumstances than I did as I was coming through the sort of political and professional ranks.
Right.
I think, in the United States, there's a lot of concern about affordability. Will people be able to afford homes? How are they going to support their families? And, also some concern about the sustainability agenda. And here we are, we've kind of presented this next generation with a world that has a lot of challenges.
For sure.
So I want to be very mindful of what I can provide and how I can be helpful, but not make assumptions about the lives that these women and young women and young men lead today. I also feel I have a lot to learn from them about sort of how they communicate today. Not that I'm really great at it, but it is the world that is, coming, this sort of very intense social media world, whether we like it or not, and how people get information. So really learning from younger people as well, what kind of information they consume, how they use it to make professional decisions about where they move, where they work, how they want to kind of structure their lives. So I do feel I can really be helpful to people and give them a sense of sort of the historical, context and how much progress has been made, but also how much more needs to be made, but also how to learn from them and
Right.
really try to continue learning about how to be part of the conversation going forward.
It is symbiotic, right? I mean, we each have different skills, and the anyone that we meet in business, regardless of age, also has a unique set of skills. And I think the opportunity to be able to share the thought leadership in certain various different areas, whether they're soft skills or not, actually just makes it that much richer for all of us. And I think that's a really good point to make, because I'm sure you have as well as myself. When I'm in a mentorship situation, I learn just as much from the person I'm speaking to as hopefully they learn from me. So that's really where the magic happens, right?
It is. I do think the one thing that I feel like I can bring to the conversation, and I'm sure you can, and other people who, are sort of at the stage in our careers that we are, is helping people though understand kind of what came before. Because I do think, and this is human nature, right? You live in the moment you live in, and you are not as cognizant of what went on before you that led to this opportunity that you have, or to the ability you have to, participate in a certain career. So I always say, I'm a lawyer, and when I went to law school, it was a time where there were, I'd say a third maybe of the law school class was women, maybe not quite a third, but it was a very different environment in terms of how law firms thought about women, kind of how we got sort of pushed into certain fields, as opposed to, I became a litigator. That was an unusual thing at the time for a woman lawyer. So trying to just give people a sense of that there were people before them, and movements before them, and individuals before them who helped create this context in which they work. And I do think that's an important thing that we can impart all the time.
Absolutely. Because to your point, the women who came before us paved the way for us, and we need to be thankful for that as well, and have a very sensitive and empathetic perspective to some of the challenges that they may have faced. And I think in each generation before us and after us will be doing the similar things for the ones that come after them. And I think that's just a human nature's way of an evolving societies globally. And I think that's a really very important point. I would be really remiss, because you have, my friend, the most stellar resume. You've accomplished so many things. You've had, I'm sure you will probably think, the gift of being able to be in the right place at the right time in order to affect some of this change. But being and working at the US Embassy in Afghanistan must have been an experience like none other. Perhaps with our viewing and listening audience, you can share one of the takeaways that you had, positive takeaways that you had from that experience.
Sure. And you're right. It was a really a life-changing experience. Just for a little bit of context, I had done some work in Afghanistan for a nonprofit NGO that was working on election-related issues. And I was in Afghanistan doing that work, and had dinner with a friend of mine at the U.S. Embassy, who said, we know that Afghan women are super important to the work we're doing in Afghanistan. We want to uplift them and support their work, and we're thinking about how to best do that. So we chatted about it. I really have to say, not that I thought nothing of it, but I wasn't really thinking this would be something I would be asked to do. And then I was. I ended up going to Kabul for about a year and a half, lived and worked in the embassy compound. I was very lucky, however. in that my job was to really go out and meet Afghan women leaders and men leaders too, but around the country, primarily women who were working on economic and civil society, organizations and projects, and really try to learn from them what they needed and what the U.S. Embassy could do to support their work. So I was able to travel to really a lot of the country and see a lot of things, visit, again, universities, women's radio stations, women's businesses, markets, women working in the small business sector, women, working to increase literacy, girls' schools. So I saw a tremendous amount and feel I was very privileged to do that. I'd say two things I really learned. One has to do with really the strength of the women who were the Afghan women, and that they were developing at the time the kinds of solutions that they saw to the problems and challenges they faced. And my sense of my job was that I wanted to do what I could with the resources the embassy had available to support that work. Not to tell these women what I thought that they should be doing, but to really understand what they saw as the best way forward. So I relearned perhaps that that's the most important thing you do when you're working with groups of people from an environment that's not your own, is to listen to them. Like, what is it that they need? How have they thought about the problem? And what solutions or interventions do they want to work on? So that was one really big lesson that, again, I guess in a way I relearned, because I probably knew that before, but I really saw it on the ground, and I saw the impact and difference it made when you listen to people, as opposed to saying, here's what we want you to do.
Right.
I don't think that's all that helpful, in the long run. The second thing I learned was very new to me. I had, I'd worked in the U.S. government in the United States Senate, and I'd done a lot of work abroad, working with women's groups and women leaders, but I had not been a diplomat. And I learned a lot about the power of diplomacy and the importance of soft, sort of, as we call it, soft power, right? The people to people kind of conversations that you have as a diplomat. I often think the kind of the way we think of diplomats, right, in culture, in pop culture, movies, is that they're running around at cocktail parties talking to other diplomats from other countries. And that is indeed, of course, in part what diplomats do. They talk to the people in the host government, they talk to their peers in other governments. But I really saw the power and importance of that next kind of conversation with civil society leaders and leaders in the business community and people who are really on the ground, again, trying to make a difference. So that was a big lesson for me. And I took away from that so much about how important it is for diplomats to do that as we do our work.
What I love, Stephenie, about the things that you've been exposed to throughout your career is, you started your foundational elements are rooted in the law. Mm-hmm. And we all know that, and to your point, there weren't a lot of female lawyers in litigation, let's say, as an example. The interesting thing is that the skills that you learned from those fundamental early stages of your career have really carried you through to today.
Yes. And it's so interesting you say that, because I was talking to someone maybe even just last week, and that person was asking me about my career. And I started off by saying that I've done a lot of different things, but to me, the through line of everything is that I really have been an advocate, whether it was in the courtroom, whether it was in the State Department, whether it was inside the institution of, the State Department, outside the institutions, as a consultant, as a, business person. For me, advocacy takes many forms, but it has been what I've done. Mm-hmm. I've written about it. I see that is the thread throughout the various things that I've done with my career. And I agree with you. For me, I got a lot out of going to law school and being a lawyer. It really helped ground me in a way of thinking that for me, served me well.
Right. Now, let's flip the dial a little bit to the books, because we know that a professional career has a lot of writing, and I'm sure that you've contributed. I know that you've done a lot of publications and you've contributed to a lot of various different, in different forms, to the movement of women and girls. But tell us a little bit about, you have two books, Take Action and Feminine Foreign Policy, which, that they're heavy titles to take a look at, especially the one on feminine foreign policy. So share with our viewing and listening audience, what would be the takeaway if we were to pick up those books and read them? What are you hoping would be the takeaway for your reader?
I think they're very different books in a way, but they do both get to the issue of how do we continue to make progress in terms of how women participate in the world. So the first book I wrote, Take Action, Fighting for Women and Girls, was actually a COVID project. I guess we all had one. This was
exactly.
I decided that I had been talking to a lot of people who felt, or who would often say to me, what can I really do? I'm interested in advocating or taking steps to, either advocate for women abroad or in my community or myself. So I decided to take a look at how to best help people do that. So that the Take Action book is really a very practical book about, there are 4 issues I identified that are true in every community that are important: access to education, access to economic opportunity, access to political opportunity, and addressing the scourge of gender-based violence. Those are 4 issues. They're everywhere. They look different, but those are the issues that face all of us as women and men living in our world. And so for each chapter, I wrote a bit about why it's important, what the statistics are, what the arguments are for advancing the issue of, girls' education or economic empowerment, et cetera. And then I give people resources in the back of each chapter relevant to that topic. So, here are some books you can read, here are movies you can screen, TV shows, organizations, with the idea that if you take this book, hopefully you can then use it to be a good advocate. And some things are very, very specific, like ask the people at your coffee shop if they buy from women-owned businesses, or, to write an op-ed. I mean, there are many things I hope people can take away from the book that they could do. The second book is different. I co-authored it with Susan Markham, the woman with whom I founded Smash Strategies. And it's really about this movement of countries around the world and civil society activists for a different kind of foreign policy, a foreign policy that focuses on how to empower women, how to look at gender equality as part of foreign policy, not the entire bit of it, how to advance women's leadership in foreign policy, how to think about security differently, because we live in a world where if you say the word security, most people think about the military and militarization. And there's nothing wrong with having a strong military and countries defending themselves militarily. But often around the world, we forget that on a daily basis, people are facing things like food insecurity, insecurity around their access to healthcare, education. There are large issues that we need to encompass in the way that foreign policy thinks about interacting on a global stage. So that's the second book, and it's a challenging concept, because at some level people question, is that really something that is relevant in this era? But at the same time, I think we're in an era where the world order is changing and different. And there's a really good opportunity for conversations about how to think about the global kind of conversation, national security for each country, and the interactions that countries have with each other in a different way. And this is one aspect of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hope that people take the book as a way to engage in the conversation about a new kind of foreign policy with a focus on women and gender equality.
Now, let's take us to a personal front where you've actually made a transition from, being in parts of very large organizations that obviously have a very political element into entrepreneurship. In that transition from working with very large teams and very large groups, and certainly the diplomacy that you learned in your political career, I'm sure translates, as you can appreciate, very well into being diplomatic as an entrepreneur. If you had to pinpoint one skill that you feel, in addition to diplomacy, that it's been extremely beneficial in an entrepreneurial environment, what would that be?
Oh gosh. Well, I think one of the most important skills in general in life, but true in entrepreneurship, is listening, is really understanding what people need and what they're really asking for from you as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, however you think about that job. Because my experience is that people often say something that a goal that they want to achieve, but there's really something more under it. And if you really listen to people and ask good questions about what their true goals are, why are they interested in this? What do they hope to achieve? How can you help them? That gives you a basis for being much more effective as somebody who they want to hire. For me, I've never wanted to be the person who just says, oh yeah, sure, we'll do that. Or when I worked for elected officials, just blindly saying, okay, you want to do, X, fine. My job has always been, to me, I don't want to undercut what the person who's hiring me or who has hired me wants, but I want to be sure that it's the most effective thing for them to reach their goal. So listening to them, asking good questions, and making sure that I really understand where somebody wants to be with this project or this initiative is super helpful.
And I think, to your point, I'm going to ask you to share with us the award program that you've started, because every award program is recognition. And I know that as part of our community, that we're also starting an award program for community connector and brand ambassador. And what I'm really trying to do is recognize the people who selflessly step out of their comfort zone and really try to help and push the initiative of this global community connection. In your awards program, what are you trying to recognize?
Well, I have this Advocate of the Year award, which I've now done for 5 years, and I decided to start this project because I had worked with lots of women and women's organizations around the world doing great work, from large organizations to smaller organizations, and I really, though, sensed or knew from my work that a lot of the smaller organizations and women at smaller organizations, or organizations that were pushing forward issues around women and gender that were smaller, were not getting necessarily the kind of airtime that I thought they deserved. Big organizations are great. I have nothing against them, but they tend to have big entities. They have people who help them do communication and really get out there. I wanted to recognize an organization or two each year that was doing work that really helped empower and bring along other women and other, women and girls. So, for example, I have given the award to a group that works in Egypt with small business women. Actually, that's the necklace I'm wearing. A group that works with Afghan girls' education, now homed in Rwanda after the fall of Kabul. a group that has worked on helping young women in the African American community in Richmond, have sort of a good educational mentorship program, and a couple of others. So I have really looked at groups that are doing something that for me is important, but also that the person that is embodying the work is someone who is really looking to make change and is undaunted in really difficult circumstances.
And, Stephenie, I think that takes our conversation full circle, because one of the things that we do in the guest blog is we ask folks to share 3 words of advice. And I think you're a great example of living by core values that you believe in and exemplifying those core values in the community that you serve and the people that you connect with. So your 3 words of advice are trust your voice.
Yeah.
So to wrap up our conversation, why don't you give our viewing and listening audience the reason why trust your voice is so important to you in the work that you're doing?
Well, because for me, I see that we often, as women particularly, are socialized to not trust our voice. And I have talked to and been with so many women around the world who, when they finally figure out that they just need to trust what they know to be right for them, what an impact they can have and are having. So trusting your voice, to me, is the core of what we need to encourage people to do. Find your passion, trust your voice, really understand that only you know that, and you need to recognize that and act on it.
Well, I have to say, you and I could talk for hours, and there's so many touch points where we can expand our conversation. And I'm going to invite you to come back to our podcast again a few months down the road, because as a sponsor, I would like you to be able to share your experience with one-to-one with our community. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and giving us insight into how you truly are smashing traditional barriers globally.
Well, thank you. And I'd love to come back, and I've loved being here. And you're right, we could talk for hours. So we'll keep doing that.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. And to you, our viewing and listening audience, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this edition of Keeping It Real. And I'd like to send my personal thanks to all of our sponsors and mentors for their ongoing support, and ask that you share and invite your friends and colleagues to subscribe to our show, Business Mentorship Keeping It Real, found on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel. Stephenie and I would like to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you next time when we meet another business owner and celebrate their great idea.